Hello, my name is Anne Marie Cannon, and I'm the host of Armchair Historians. What's your favorite history? Each episode begins with this one question. My guests come from all walks of life and are people who get really excited about a particular time, place, or person from our distant or not so distant past. The jumping off point is where they become curious, then enter the rabbit hole into discovery. Some through scholarly research, others through pop culture, documentaries, and other podcasts. We look at history through the filter of other people's eyes. Armchair Historians is a Belgian Rabbit production. Stay up to date with us through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help to spread the word. Wherever you listen to your podcast, that is where you'll find us. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also find us at armchairhistorians.com. Armchair Historians is an independent podcast. If you'd like to support the show, become a patron through Patreon or buy us a cup of coffee through Ko-fi. Links to both in the episode notes. Hello, fellow armchair historians. Anne Marie here. Before we get into part 2 of my interview with Emily Strasser, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our Ko-fi and Patreon supporters. I'm truly humbled by all of the people who think that what I'm doing is worthwhile enough to support the show. To find out more about how you can support the show, you can go to www.armchairhistorians.com, or you can go to any of our episode pages from your podcast platform of choice. Also, don't forget there's other ways that you can support the show by following us on social media and joining the conversation, or leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. In today's episode, we pick up where we left off last week with Emily Strasser, author of Half-Life of a Secret: Reckoning with a Hidden History. Emily's a writer based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She received her MFA in nonfiction from the University of Minnesota. Her work has appeared in multiple publications, including Catapult, Plowshares, The Bitter Southerner, The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and Gulf Coast, among others.
And change the patterns that allowed what happened in the past that was harmful to happen.
Do you think that's possible?
I mean, I think collective resistance is possible, and we see it. You know, we see it in the fight for racial justice. We see it in fights for women's rights. We see it in any small way that somebody is like working towards a more just world. I have to believe in collective resistance. See it in the climate movement, you know, whether it can win, you know, that's what I don't know. Right.
Yeah. I guess that was my question.
Yeah.
Look into the crystal ball.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. I wish I could tell you, you know, but I think maybe my attitude has shifted a little bit in that, like, what if the point isn't winning, but like creating spaces of like meaning and beauty wherever we can. And maybe that is a win itself. You know, maybe none of us are going to save the whole world, but like if we can do some good or push back in our small way, create communities that like are upholding some kind of justice and goodness and meaning, that's beautiful too. You know, we just have one life to live, so like let's live it up.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's beautiful. I didn't know we were going to get so deep.
Me neither. I didn't prepare for this.
So this is an interesting. I didn't know about Oak Ridge. So this is kind of new to me. It's, you know, I love it when somebody focuses in on a part of history that we know about, but we don't know about that exact piece of it. So does this community still exist?
It does, yeah. It's not in its heyday anymore. It's a lot smaller than it was during the height of the Cold War. But it's still Y-12, the weapons plant where my grandfather worked, is still an operating nuclear weapons plant. They still have what is probably, it's still classified, right, the single largest stockpile of enriched uranium in the world. They still make a crucial component for hydrogen bombs. And one of the nuclear weapons laboratories that was called X-10 and is now called Oak Ridge National Laboratory actually does a lot of really important like medical research and environmental research. So they've moved in a different direction. They're no longer a weapons laboratory. So it's a really complicated place with a really complicated history. And I want to add something else about what you said. This is an aspect of this history that a lot of people don't know about, right? Most people know, I think, if they know about the Manhattan Project, they might know about Los Alamos, which is where kind of the scientific luminaries, we have like Oppenheimer and Fermi and, a bunch of other like big names are working there to build the atomic bomb. And, that's in New Mexico, secret desert town outside of Albuquerque. So that's a famous place. Oak Ridge was more of an industrial operation. It was more of the people living in Oak Ridge didn't know what they were doing. And so this circles back to my interest in like living a good life, but it's like most of us are not the scientific luminaries. Most of us are not, deciding we're going to drop these bombs, we're going to make these bombs. Most of us maybe don't even like know exactly like what we're doing or what we're involved in. But I was interested in that aspect of like, what about the ordinary people? What effect does it have on them to work on something like this? What about the janitors who are sweeping up? What about the people like my grandfather who know a little bit, but not all that much? So the story of like the everyday. And what's interesting too is like the vast majority of, I'm not remembering the numbers off the top of my head, they're in the book somewhere, but there were way more workers at Oak Ridge than there were at Los Alamos. And way more of the project's budget went towards this industrial operation to enrich uranium than went towards the more famous parts of the project. And yet we don't know as much about it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Those are the kind of histories I try to highlight on my show. They're hidden. I just talked to somebody about a woman named Anna Rosenberg, who I had never heard of before. He wrote a book called The Confidant, and she was really involved in a lot of important decisions that were made during the Roosevelt era. She was the confidant. People could trust her to keep their secrets, and it's a hidden history. And it's like, I love when historians dig into these pieces, like what you're doing, and how did it affect? I mean, because that's what it comes back to. Most of us are just the common person.
Right.
But so my next question is, where do we see this history in pop culture? And I'm just going to interject my own thing in here because I just saw this series with Harry Styles.
Okay.
And I cannot think of the name of it, but it's about this community that reminds me of Oak Ridge, like what you're talking about. It's like a secret community. And I mean, there's a bigger story and a bigger picture, but it feels like this. And I was just trying to, give me a second. I'm going to figure out what it's called.
I'm curious. I don't actually know this, and now I want to watch it.
It seems like this perfect, ideal community. The wife is waiting at the door with the cocktail when the husband gets home. Don't Worry, Darling. It's called Don't Worry, Darling.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I've heard of it. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
A 1950s housewife living with her husband in a utopian experimental community begins to worry that his glamorous company could be hiding disturbing secrets.
Ooh,
anyways,
okay. That's my jam. Disturbing secrets.
Right. So it's that is definitely a pop culture thing that seems to be semi-related to this. But can you think of other, where do we see this in pop culture?
Yeah. Well, so I guess the first thing I'd say is I think there's been a shift in that, during the Cold War and, 1950s, 60s, you have a lot of pop culture atomic bomb stuff, in a kind of like jovial way. You have songs, and you have in Las Vegas where, outside the Nevada test site, you have atomic tourism, people coming to like watch. They would go to atomic bomb themed like cocktail parties on rooftop hotels in Vegas and like watch the test blast from there. They had Miss Atomic Bomb beauty pageants where people would dress up as mushroom clouds. Stuff that feels really cringy now, right? From our perspective, this kind of glorification of this violence. And so I don't see that much of that now, with the exception of there's a flavor of it in places like Oak Ridge, that still base their history on a pride in this work. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So there is a kind of lightness sometimes that still surprises me. Because even whatever you think of, I don't think the bombing on Hiroshima was a good thing, but however you come down on like that decision in the messiness of a very brutal war, it's not something to be taken lightly, I don't think. It was horrible, no matter how you cut it. So that said, now the most direct pop cultural link I can think of is Manhattan was a TV show about Los Alamos, and that came out 5 years ago. I could be wrong about that. It was fun to watch because, it was this dramatization of this history that I'd been really immersed in. And some of the details that I loved were just like seeing really nerdy details, right? Like I've done a lot of archival research. So seeing the actual like folders, period folders where they're like, and the memos, the typescript that they used. And I was like, oh, wow, look, it's real people using those things, that I have touched in the archives. Yeah, so that was really fun. And that show, I think, was thinking about some of the questions that I was thinking about, around like, what's the human toll on the people who are doing this work? What kind of moral dilemmas do people have? Okay, another example, this may not quite be pop culture, but it is current and maybe a little plug for my own work, but I was in 2020 presented a BBC podcast on
I saw that.
Yeah, it was a really cool opportunity on Leo Szilard, who was a Hungarian Jewish scientist who was involved in the Manhattan Project too, and who's a really interesting character because he's, arguably, it's right complicated. No one person is responsible for the atomic bomb. One of his scientific discoveries sort of directly led to people realizing that it was actually possible to build this instead of theoretically possible. And he kind of pushed for it initially because there was the fear of what if the Nazis are able to make this? And so we need one first. And he's the person who got Einstein to write the letter to Roosevelt that ultimately led to the Manhattan Project being started. And then later on, for a variety of reasons, like thought that it shouldn't be used. Germany, it's clear that Germany is going to be defeated before the bomb is even ready to be used. It's clear that they don't have a bomb. And he doesn't think it's right to use it on the Japanese, who don't have a bomb, and advocates for it to be tested on an uninhabited island first so that people can see what it will cause and kind of threaten. So he's a really, really complicated, interesting figure. So I think there is still current, like, interest in this history. And that was one example of that.
There's still a lot to uncover, too.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, totally.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to share?
I always ask this question in interviews, too. It's a good one. I've so enjoyed this conversation. It went places I didn't completely expect.
Oh, good. What one thing would you want my audience to know and or remember about this history?
Maybe it's what we talked about earlier, that like this is a history that involves many, many ordinary people at many levels of power and not having power, and that it, I guess another, maybe an argument in the book that we haven't really covered is, or only obliquely, is that being involved in something like this not only, leads to violence, say, against the people who are bombed or the people who are exposed to fallout from nuclear tests, the external victims or the people who are exposed to environmental contaminants in the site, but it actually like hurts the people who are working on it too, like a lot of workers have, gotten sick from their work and exposure to chemicals and radiation. And that's not even to contend with how does it deaden us emotionally to accept violence on this scale? Like what happens to us when we normalize something like nuclear weapons, something like saying that it's acceptable to possess and potentially use weapons that are capable of violence on such a cruel and massive scale. That devaluing of human life, I think, is bad for everyone and keeps us from being fully like human and alive. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true of many histories. You know, I think of many harmful histories. Racism, like, is bad for white people too, which is not to say that white people are victims of it, but that we should give it up, not for others, not just for others, but for ourselves.
Yeah. Where can we find you?
So I have a website. It's my name.com, emilystrasser.com. And I'm on Twitter. I'm not super active on Twitter. And who knows what's happening with Twitter these days.
Oh, right.
Right.
Creepy.
Yeah, right. I don't know how much longer. By the time you air this, will it still be going? Am I going to still be on Twitter? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the question every day, right?
Yeah. I'm not currently on Instagram. I may get back on soon and in the run up to the book. But my website is the best place. I'll keep links up to date about what I'm up to.
And when does the name of the book? What's the name of the book again?
Half-Life of a Secret. And then the subtitle is Reckoning with a Hidden History. And it comes out April 4th.
So it comes out in April, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure when this episode's going to come out. It'll be before April, probably. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, would love for people to pre-order if they're interested. Pre-orders really help writers, help presses, like, anticipate how many books to print. It's a really great way to support writers. So you can pre-order it through the University Press of Kentucky, and you should be able to order it from any bookshop or anywhere that sells books.
There was one thing that I wanted to say that you reminded me of or made me think about. And I sell vintage clothing and fashion and that type of thing. I'm really into that. And I never thought about the word atomic as it correlates to it's weird. I'm like embarrassed to say that, but reading about your book and reading about you, it's like I realized that connection, and it's completely changed the way I feel about that word and how it's related to the atomic bomb.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because actually that does relate to your question about pop culture too, that it is embedded into our language in ways that we don't think about that much. Radioactive too, it's kind of like, there's songs about being radioactive, and I think people know that that's dangerous, but it's in a lighthearted way. Now, of course, atomic isn't only a bomb. It also, the atomic level of, atoms are the thing that make up our whole world. But certainly one of the ways that word came, I think, into the common lingo is through the atomic bomb. So it definitely has that association.
Well, and I think that what it is related to with regard to style and fashion, design, it's connected to the other. Yeah, the atomic bomb and atomic energy.
Oh, okay. Maybe I don't know a lot about this particular. I'd love to hear more about the particular context of how it's related to fashion.
Yeah, it's kind of like deco, atomic,
Oh, so it's like the era, like related to like a nostalgia for the atomic era. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's so. Yeah. Right.
Mid-century modern, atomic.
Right. Yeah. Gosh, yeah, we have nostalgia for a lot of things that are...
that we don't think about. Yeah, this has definitely made me think about that anyways.
Yeah, I don't think so. I wasn't so happy with the way I answered your first question, but maybe that's just how it is. So
I'm always amazed at how historians think about that question so literally. And it's really just kind of like a segue into whatever your project is right now.
Yeah. But. So what's interesting about that question, and I've been thinking about it, is I'm not interested in war. I'm not really interested in weapons. I don't like war movies, So for me to write a book that's about World War II, it's about the Cold War, that's about nuclear weapons, is kind of a big surprise to me as much as anyone else. I'm interested in women's history. I'm interested in stories of resistance. I'm interested in European medieval history, all kinds of different histories that are not this one. And so And yet I became obsessed, right? And so I guess for me, the way in was very personal, and we'll get more into this, but it was a family history, and it really came about with me trying to understand something about where my family comes from, how we got to be the way we are, what is the ground that I stand on, And so, and as a writer and a researcher, I really come from a creative nonfiction background, which like intimately ties often the personal with the researched, and use the personal as a lens through which to explore a larger context. And so for me, this was driven from this personal angle. And I can get interested in almost anything, give me any topic. And if I do enough research, I'm going to find a way to be interested in it. Mm-hmm. So that's a way to not answer the favorite history, but.
Well, I know. So like one of my idols is Terry Gross, Fresh Air.
Oh yeah. She's amazing.
I adore her. I always think, what would Terry Gross do in this situation?
You can learn a lot from that.
But I remember that she interviewed a guy who wrote a book about banana blights. Like, talk about boring on the surface. It was one of the best interviews I've ever listened to. I don't know. It was the passion of which the person approached the subject matter, and the passion, intrigue that Terry Gross had. I think you can make, if you look beneath the surface enough, you'll find a reason to be interested. I love that answer.
I mean, for me, it's like so much about how things are interrelated. And sometimes I have trouble focusing because you pick up one tiny thing and it's connected to everything else. And that's just how my brain works, right? Yeah. I literally have this essay I want to write about dust. How boring can you think about dust? But it's about housekeeping. It's about like the cells in our bodies that decay. It's about the satisfaction of cleaning. It's about like women's work. It's, I think I have all these ideas about how an essay about dust could be interesting, and these thoughts about dust. So I don't know. It's like sometimes those are the most fun kind of things to write or read, are things that seem so mundane, and you can take the leap to see how they connect to big questions.
Fascinating. See, I don't think about those things unless somebody thinks about them for me. And then like what you do, like you wrote this book about this, I wouldn't have thought of it in that way. But when it's presented to me in a certain light, then I can think about it in that way. I'm not as creative, imaginative, maybe. I don't know. Or I don't think in that way. So,
well, you're creative in a lot of ways. This is asking these questions, having these conversations is hugely creative. You have to.
Yeah. That you're right. Thank you. I'm going to say thank you to that. It's true. Well, Emily, I really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you so much for showing up on Sunday.
Oh, thank you for working me in on a weekend. I know my schedule is challenging.
No, it works. Yeah, mine is kind of too lately. But I'm glad we got to do this. There you have it, fellow armchair historians. Be sure to check out our episode notes to find out more about pre-ordering the book, about Emily, and about the history that we talked about today. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.